There we go.
Hello, I think we're live, Elise.
We are live.
Hello, everybody on Facebook. Let us know if you're here with us today. Elise and I are just coming to you with a topic. I feel like I'm being a bad example to my kids because of our marital stress. If this interests you today, hang with us for the next hour. And we'll be talking about this topic and answering your questions. I do want to remind you, this is Leslie Vernick's public Facebook page. And so be mindful of that as you interact with us on the chat. We would love to see your interaction, but you may be wanting to refer to a friend or a neighbor rather than yourself if you're worried that someone you know may be on this page since it's public.
We'd love for a few of you to say hello just right off the bat so we know that you're here. We know that we're live. We look like we are. Thank you. We are live. Good. Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you. Hey, there it comes. Wonderful. There's always this panic moment like we're not live. What is that going to mean? So, yeah. So anyway, that's wonderful. Thank you all.
Yes. Hello, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Hey, Karen. Hi, Erin. Yes, thank you, everybody, for chiming in.
Yeah.
And we've got Julie here helping us today and tech support. So we are going to be talking about this topic. If you think of a question as we're on and you would like us to answer that later on, please type that in. Julie's going to help us collect those so that we can read your questions and answer those. And here we are, Christmas week. I can't believe it already. How stressful is it feeling for you, Elise?
Yeah, I found myself this morning, to be quite honest with you, a little more tense, a little shorter, with my own spouse of like, oh, because, everything that's got to get done. And I just had to remind myself like, hey, wait a minute, slow yourself down, pay attention to your limitations, and had to do kind of some of the training that we've all had. And we'd love to coach you around you, practicing it myself in these moments. I feel like I've got a pretty good handle when there's margin. When the margin closes in, it starts squeezing me in a way that maybe it comes out that, or we get shook up, as Leslie would say, in a way that I don't really kind of want to expose myself, in that manner. So this is a season that really exposes kind of really sometimes the worst of who we are. And we understand that. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit today in a little bit different capacity. But we know that Christmas is even going to put more pressure on this topic, right? Being a bad example to our kids because of our marital stress. And you throw one more thing of stress on it and we're over the top, right?
Yeah, I like how you worded that. The margin closes in. And if you're in a really difficult or destructive relationship, that margin starts to feel tight, right?
There isn't any.
Yes. Or maybe there isn't any.
Right. One of the things for those who joined the Conquer E2C, we had a bonus round, so to speak. We already had that early December, and I talked about limitations, right? And so the truth is, ladies, we're all limited. We're limited emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, right? And so we really kind of like took a hard look at these limitations of where we're limited. And when we throw, Christmas, which requires, and our culture really presses for so much perfection and so much, splendor and awe and, wonder around it, we really have, gotten so far away from the true meaning of Christmas. But I'm as engaged as anybody is on it. We really find ourselves, we've run out of our resources. I don't have the emotional capacity to pull off regular life and something on top of it. I don't have the spiritual capacity even sometimes, like, oh, when do I do quiet time and decorate a tree and make cookies and buy presents and buy, right? And so really kind of stepping into this realization of limitations and of really embracing it, not just believing it, but embracing it, of how we just are limited, and we were created that way. There's only one being, our Lord, and who is unlimited. Our God, who is unlimited. He's omni everything, but we aren't. What will that mean? And I think we feel that tension. If I could drop back to the topic just a little bit, you know, because of the tension in the home, we feel like we're a bad example. And it's
Mhm.
possible that we don't really haven't taken a hard look, Susan, as you and I were talking, at kind of what our best self is. And we haven't taken a hard look and a real look of actually what our limitations are.
Mhm.
So I can keep going further, but would you want to comment around that at all?
Well, that's a fantastic point. And, we all try to cope the best we can, but our coping mechanisms are not always the best, right? And so really investigating, have we come up with some coping mechanisms that are showing a bad example? And so
Mm,
you mentioned, I'm just going to put our ticker up here.
mhm,
You
mhm,
mentioned E2C. And
mhm,
so those of you who are newer to this page or maybe haven't caught the previous lives that we've been doing the past few weeks, we have a group coming up that's starting in January that's called Empowered to Change. We say E2C,
mhm,
where it's a small coaching group where we help you to identify some of these things. What are your limitations? What are your coping mechanisms that are maybe not working for you so that we can figure out what would be better, right? What would help you in your life,
mhm,
empower you to change your life.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, exactly. I love teaching this class. I know, you do as well, and it just is. I don't know. It's just this deep dive. Really, we
Mhm.
get a chance in this 6 month period to really investigate that. It's not just going to be one lesson and then move on to the next lesson. But you're gonna. There's a little pace to it at the beginning, but it really starts culminating about midway through, and we kind of pace ourselves on out, and where you can kind of say, "Whoa, that made a big difference." And we work very, very hard in creating some questions for you all so that you can take away from each lesson application. Like, how
Mhm.
is that going to apply to me? How is that going to apply
Mhm.
to my life? Because it's so important, because we are full of knowledge. We've got it. But we haven't turned it into belief and application. Like,
Mhm.
functionally, what am I doing differently that I know up here? Right? And E2C is really going to give you an opportunity to take it from here and put it, into practicality. And so we want to do that. Let's, if you don't mind, can I make a shift kind of back to our
Absolutely. Yeah.
um, um, I feel like I'm being a bad example to my kids because of marital stress. You and I chatted about a few questions around that, and I'm kind of curious if we can maybe kind of dive into that a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
listening from them about some of those questions, I thought they were awesome.
Well, I was wondering, is anybody identifying with this, first of all, right? Is this, resonating with you?
Mhm,
And if so, in what ways are you noticing or worrying that your example might not be good for your kids? I'm really curious what it is that you're seeing or noticing about yourself. What is your experience so that we can get specific here and
mhm,
really help you the best possible. So if you're willing and it
mhm,
feels safe to you to sort of share
mhm.
what your friend or your neighbor might they might be feeling or
Somebody that you
experiencing.
know.
Hmm.
Right? Um,
Yes. So we can address that specifically.
right. Julie, if it's possible for you to write that question, can we put that, or maybe even for you, Susan, to type that question back out? And what ways are you noticing, and I
Mhm.
actually lost you at that point, that
Yep.
you
I will just put that in the
okay.
chat.
Okay, 'cause it's really important, because we think that you've noticed, otherwise you wouldn't have this bad feeling. So you've something has told you, "This is not right. This is not how I wanna be with my children. This is not the life I want for my children." All
Mhm.
this marital stress and distress, right? And so what is it that you're noticing that we can begin to speak into? Because noticing is really an enormous step
It
to
is.
healing. We can't change what we don't we're not aware of. It's a Dr. Philism, but it's a true It's a true statement. We simply just cannot change it. But this says already in Susan's question is that you are noticing. What is it? Let's talk about it. So,
Mhm.
uh, my friend is recently separated. She keeps her emotions in check nearly all the time, but recently she got upset in front of her teenage children. She regrets that they are having to navigate her emotions on top of their own.
Mhm.
How can she handle it better when she occasionally feels overwhelmed but doesn't want to further burden her kids? Okay.
Mhm.
Can you see the question as well?
Yeah, I'm seeing that there in the chat. So one of the ways that you're feeling like you're a bad example is being emotionally reactive, perhaps,
Yeah.
right? And I'm guessing there's other women out there who are feeling that as well.
Right.
Very common problem in this community and with our ministry.
Right.
High expectations is another one.
Right. So I'd love to know, Linda, maybe if you could speak more to that, or certainly for yourself, what are those expectations? Could you identify those expectations?
Mhm.
Right? What are they? And you be able to take a really good look at those expectations. Are these the expectations I want to place on myself or on my children? What's behind that? What's driving that expectation? Are you aware of that? Right? And so,
Mm.
and I would say on some level, Erin has this, let me pull it back down, has this expectation that she's never to be emotional in front of her children.
Mm.
Right. And so my hope, Erin, is to say, kind of where does that come from? And certainly there are some emotions that we would have that can be harmful, right? And there are some emotions that it can be really tender and really, invite them into places that not necessarily would burden them, but let them know that you're a real person,
Yeah.
right? That listen, if you pinch us, we say ouch, right? That mom doesn't always have it together 24/7, right? But if you're noticing that you getting emotional or you getting super reactive or you getting super snappy isn't a one off, but it has some pattern to it. It has some ease to it, right? And that you're saying, "Hey, that's not the woman I wanna be,"
Mhm.
right? That's not the best me. That we can begin to look at, and this is one of the things that we'll really talk about in E2C, is being responsive, to learning to respond versus learning being reactive. Reactive doesn't take any skill, by the way, we can all do that. Just
Mhm.
like that. But learning to respond. I'm gonna silence my thing. Would you kinda take over there, Susan, just a little bit?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of reading in the chat generally what you're experiencing, and we are going to go back and read the questions specifically and answer those before we finish today. But I'm just kind of getting an idea of what it is you're struggling with. High expectations and
Mhm,
avoiding problems. So
mhm,
these are how you would show a bad example,
mhm,
perhaps, and going into fight or flight.
mhm.
So, as Elise was talking earlier, some of these are just your humanness, right? These are not bad examples. They're examples of your humanness. And you get the opportunity to show your kids what do you do when you have human emotions?
Right.
What do you do when you experience the stress of life? That's real.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Right.
so we get the opportunity to educate our children and to show them what it can look like, right? If we're not just reactive, if we are intentional about our responses.
Mhm, mhm. And kind of good, the other thing, as I mentioned a little earlier, in Empower to Change, we take a lot of time around that because we think it's a really powerful place. And it's not, we can train our brain to learn to respond, right? That we can say, hey, we're okay. I know how to do this. I can calm myself down. One of the examples that I often use is like, when is the time that, if you think about it, when is the time that really solution begins to happen? After a fight or, a disagreement or tension, when does solution typically begin to happen? And it typically begins to happen when we get calmed down.
Mhm.
And sometimes it takes a minute, sometimes it takes 5 minutes, sometimes it takes 5 hours, 5 days, right? But when we get in a calmer state, usually we can then respond to the issue at hand. Otherwise, our natural wiring, and again, this natural wiring says, danger, danger, danger. You've got to fight. You better start taking off. And we do that in 1,000 ways. We don't typically, we actually don't take off on foot, but we do it, like we shut down, we do all kinds of stuff.
Avoid, yeah.
Avoid, right?
Hide.
All those things, exactly. But we, or we fight. And again, we don't duke up. We don't start throwing punches. I hope you don't. We'll get arrested for that. And so but we fight with our mouth. Right? We fight with, we use our emotions to fight with our mouth and the energy that it gives us. Right. And so then we all of a sudden we feel bad because our best self didn't show up. What showed up was an afraid self. And so we feel terrible. Right. And so one of the things in E2C we want to really kind of help coach you around is really how to learn to respond, of creating that pause in between this reactivity and the response. Right. And so everybody's like, ooh, everybody can be reactive. Right. And we can do that without thinking twice. But it takes a minute, it takes a calmer brain, a calmer state of mind, calmer body to go, here's how I want to show up in that moment. So as Erin said, I've gotten pretty emotional with my kids. And, and maybe we need to show some emotion. I'm not sure. Right. But I think what I heard her saying too a little bit is maybe I don't feel like that was my best self when I got emotional. So in a calmer state, and we're going to develop that. And I think Susan's going to take a little time even today to kind of develop what that best self may look like a little bit. I got a little ahead of us. If you want to go back to.
Yeah, that's okay. I love that concept that we teach in E2C of what are your character traits and highest values to settle you, because as human beings, we tend to have thoughts that create our emotions. And then the natural course of action, if we don't think about it, is that we behave based on how we feel. But because we're human beings that can be intentional and have higher order thinking, we can center ourselves on this idea of what do we want to drive us? What character traits and high values do we want to dictate our behavior, right? And that's where you get this sense of feeling like you're a good example rather than a bad example, is that you have a sense of pride and success, that you've showed up in a way that you want to show up, that you've thought about, that you're intentional about, instead of just reacting.
Yeah.
So our feelings are important. So I don't want to discount that, but they shouldn't be the driver, right? They inform us, and they can be good informants. So I like to always pay attention to feelings, sensations in our body and how we feel, but then to allow our best self ideals to drive our behavior.
And Susan and I both know that, us just speaking that is easy. The work to do that is really challenging.
It is.
Really, really challenging. Go ahead.
So what I love about our groups, Elise, and you know this, is that it's not just information. There is information, and we all love Leslie's teaching. She's magnetic. She presents things in a beautiful way. And so that is a part of Empowered to Change, is her teaching, but it is more experiential. And there is such a relational connection in these groups that really helps solidify it, and it helps us to practice in a place that's safe. So safety is really important for us as a team in this ministry, to be tender with you, to create an environment where you're going to feel safe to share, where it's confidential. And then we begin to put on these new habits, these new skills in that safe space, so that you can take it into your life, that it doesn't feel as safe, with more confidence.
Yeah. One of the things we're going to do too is visit a little bit, within some of the sessions, not maybe not every session. I haven't planned this for every session, but that we would talk about some of our wins. Like, where did we see that we stepped into this skill building where we tried,
Mhm.
and sometimes we're not going to be successful, right? But what did we learn from that moment? And then, times where we were like, we were successful, and we take that in. It's like, oh, I did it. Yay. And it felt really good. And I started to believe I can actually do this. I can come from a calmer place. I can come
Mhm.
from a place of my values, my character qualities, my integrity of who
Mm.
I want to be, who God created me to be. Right. And when that begins to show up, change begins to happen. We don't feel so disempowered by what's going on around us. We feel empowered internally by we've begun to believe that we can do differently. And that's going to be a
Mhm.
good thing. I would love to look at, again, if it's okay to look at the chat just a little bit, see what's
Sure.
for us, because I would love to continue to answer those. Suzanne says, been just reacting emotionally and been defined by the person that's just been upsetting me. Want to, oops, it just switched. What did it say? Hmm, Want to just show up. Okay. Well, Suzanne, I hope that as Susan and I have been talking, that you're beginning to get a sense of, this difference between reactivity and responding. And that is going to really impact how we feel about ourselves. Reactivity may feel good for a moment, but we know that that's not typically our best self. Now, don't let me hear, or don't hear me saying that I don't think reactivity at some points isn't necessary. Like, if we have a small child and they're fixing to step out in the street, I don't need to overthink it or get
Mhm.
before I do anything. I need to reach out and, pull that child back as fast as I can. That's reactivity to something. That's a good thing. So we know that reactivity in many circumstances or situations can be a good thing.
Mhm.
As it is relationally, it often can be an Achilles heel if that's all we know to do. If we can't bring our best self and create a pause. I was watching The Crown, and let me just kind of throw this out for just kind of fun. I did a little binge watching on that fifth season of The Crown. Hopefully, I get this right. I thought it was so impactful, and one of them said at some meeting they were all having, uh, that their pack phrase a little bit was, "Does it need to be said? Do I need to say it? Do I need to say it right now?"
Mhm.
Right? And so, like, what if we created a pause that really says, does something even need to be said right now? And we went through this grid. Yes, something needs to be said. Does it need to be said by me? Like, sometimes other people can speak for us, and that's a good thing. But it also is just creating this pause. It actually needs to be said by me. Or no, it doesn't need to. Maybe he, or she will hear that from somebody else. Right? More often than not, it needs to be said by me. Yes, and we're going to teach you to speak up when to speak up. Right? So yes, and does it need to be said now?
Mm.
What is it about this moment that it needs to be said now? And that's where we can really create the pause between reactivity and response.
Mhm. Those are great questions.
So
Really
creating
great.
pause, and then the hope is that we can reduce that feeling of not feeling like a great mom, that our children are really starting to see an example that even in tension, because they're going to live in tension the rest of their life,
Mhm.
right? Their own relational tension, their own marital tension, their own employment tension, whatever it is. And so, how can we equip them in this moment as well? So, where do you want to go? Take it.
Well, I was just thinking, you brought up some really important things, and I noticed somebody in the chat had mentioned fight or flight, right? That trauma response, and you were talking about sometimes it's good to be reactive. When you're in danger, somebody else is in danger,
Mhm.
you need to react. Part of what we work on in Empowered to Change is figuring out your triggers. That's such a word in today's culture, but really, essentially, I think what it means is becoming emotionally dysregulated because of something that's happened in your environment and not knowing how to handle that. Sometimes it's not a life or death situation. It's not about safety. Sometimes it's just our body having a reaction and us really needing to know ourselves well enough to know when that's happening and what to do with it, right? Knowing our triggers is important. Knowing ourselves is really important. And I know um, people in destructive marriages often lose a sense of their self, right? And become dysregulated because of the stress. And so then it becomes hard to really parent well
Mhm. Mhm.
when you're not even functioning well for yourself.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we do talk about parenting a little bit and Empowered to Change.
Mhm.
We kind of cover,
Mhm.
a lot, 6 months, right? Over 6 months, we cover a lot of ground.
Mhm. There is so much ground. Yeah, and this is just one of the things. And so I think that my hope is that you can see is that when you talk about reactivity, responding, kind of understanding, kind of internally what's going on just a little bit around that, that we can take this and plug it in anywhere. And I said that just
Mm,
a minute ago. But this is why the content, in a sense, the skill building, the foundation will be so important to you when you've got a hold of that, you won't be afraid. Like we can just plug whoever we want in that because you're going to know you in a better way, in a kinder, more tender way, not in a
mm,
shaming way. Like, oh, once again, I showed up bad in front of my children, right? But there's a chance, there's hope that you can say, you know what, I did, but I learned from that. Now I understand. I can do
mhm,
it differently next time, right? And change really does begin with you. Like, what will it look in your home if you do something different? Right.
mhm.
So,
That's a great question. Um, yeah, what would it look like and feel like to be a good example
right.
in the midst of any kind of stress, marital stress,
Yeah.
holiday stress? What would that look like and feel like for you to be able to show up as your best self, to be
Yeah.
proud of your behavior?
Mhm. Mhm. Just, oh, I like that, Susan. Be proud of your behavior
Mhm.
in a healthy way,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like that
You
would.
mentioned the word integrity. I love that word,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Keeping
Often,
integrity.
yeah, oftentimes we think of, and I always kind of do this.
Mhm.
Oftentimes we think of our integrity as like truthfulness, honesty, dependability, and I think that those are all words of integrity. But I like to think of integrity as really as my best self,
Mhm.
the core being of who I am. And when I do that, I kind of think of our own core of like when we're slouching, our core's getting weak. Our muscles aren't strong anymore. When our shoulders are back, when we stand tall, then, our core is strong. And so, do you know your core? Do you know your emotional core, your value core, your character core? Do you know that woman?
Mhm.
And we pound is not a good word, but we press on that pretty hard. It's so imperative because the truth is we are tossed about just like that. And,
Mhm.
as faith practitioners and, people of faith, we know that our enemy, like he's going, yes, I got her that time. She lost her
Mhm.
cool. She got so emotional. She's like, in this emotional spat with her husband and her children are watching. Watch her walk away, feel really bad, right? And so we know that's happening. And we've experienced it ourselves. We're not with that. We're not exempt from that. We don't do it perfectly, but we know that the enemy does prowl to see who he can devour. And we want to,
Mhm.
hey, we want to walk alongside you in this and
Yeah.
equip you to be the one that God had, created you to be. Your question, Susan, was kind of an up. question. We kind of went down first. Now we're going back up. Like, what would it look like? Was that the question? What would it look
Mm,
like? Keep going.
yeah. What would it look like and feel like to be a good example in the midst of any kind of stress? So we
Yeah.
could put marital stress. If
Right.
you're not in a marriage right now,
Right.
um, plug in your stress, whatever that is.
Right.
What would it look like and feel like for you
Right.
to be a good example?
Is
So I
it?
hope you're asking that of yourself. You're welcome to put that in the chat
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tina says, yes, very hard to parent. I was always defending and explaining. And even if I was defending what was right, my children told me how I damaged them. It's so hard.
Mm.
You want me to respond? You want to take that? What's your thoughts
Well,
on
I got distracted looking for it in the chat. I'm
that?
not sure which one you're reading.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah. Like from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's about 7 or 8 up. Tina is her name.
you know, we are sinful people and we do hurt each other
We do.
intentionally, unintentionally.
Mhm.
And so it can be hard to hear that your children think that you damage them. And so
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
really taking a look, are there things that I can own up to?
Mhm.
And then, allowing them to do the work
Mhm.
also of getting stronger,
Mhm.
learning how to repair themselves.
Mhm.
So I think having compassion for yourself and for your children is important here, right?
Mhm.
Certainly, we do want to own our own faults and
Mhm.
make those
Mhm.
right, but sometimes, it's unintentional.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we can't
Mhm.
always repair everything,
Mhm. Mhm.
as our children have to begin to do some work themselves,
Mhm.
right? So I don't know exactly what we're talking about. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I love exactly where you're going and saying, are there places where I didn't do well and I need to ask for forgiveness? And
Mhm.
I would hope that, Tina, that you're available for that. I also know people that would love to take advantage of that. So we want you to be aware of that as well, that this isn't now a constant, throw mom under the bus for every mistake that she made. And Susan's doing a beautiful job of saying there is a place where they're going to have to forgive you, whether you ask for it or not. They don't have to forgive you, but for their own growth and their own
Yeah.
work, coming to a place of like, that wasn't so swell. Either my mom or my dad or my environment or whatever it is. But I can stay victim of that, or I can become owner and like learn to say, hey, I don't want to do it this way, or I want to do it differently, and or that did happen. How did what will I learn from that? And how can I grow from that? And
Mhm.
that's really when Susan's saying that's their work to do. And many people do that work, and many people try to get stuck in that.
Mhm.
So be careful as you kind of move forward, one, that you are available to repair. We would always call anyone to that. And then, in genuineness and sincerity, once you have offered where you can repair, then basically saying, how do we grow from this experience? Not just move on and, hey, it past is in the past, but grow from this experience. How can this be a teaching moment for all of us?
Mhm.
What do we need to do now? The very next
Mhm.
one put down that she struggles how to respond when children are being berated, that does not escalate. No, yeah. I don't quite get the connection there. Berated sounds like escalation to me, like when people get to a place. Um,
Mm.
would you want to comment or you want me to start?
Go ahead. Go ahead
Okay.
and start.
Yeah, I mean, one, that would be incredibly hard. What I want to say around that, if that is happening, well, one, we would never want it to happen even once. Um, but one of the things we can prepare for is patterns. Years ago, I took a class and on domestic abuse, and they were saying that when men actually begin to get better it's actually more scary for women because they actually know some of the signs when men are escalating. When tension begins to rise, they have now become very sensitive to, hey, this is we're starting to build. It's
Mm,
coming. It's coming. And as men got better and there weren't those signals, women actually were more nervous and more afraid because they
mm,
knew no longer had the cues to know when it's coming. And so what I would say is if your husband is not getting better, m- the likelihood is that you have a lot of cues when it's coming. And I'm not speaking, and I'm so sorry, I cannot pronounce your name right. I don't even want to guess it. It starts with an N. A beautiful name, and I think I would mess it up if I said it. But anyway, like, do you know the patterns? Sometimes there's a pattern, a daily pattern. Sometimes they're weekly, monthly. Do you know the cues of when this escalation, when this berating is going to happen? And sometimes it's just he gets ticked off and starts. I get that, right? But what I would encourage you is to have a safety plan around that on some level. Like if you kind of know the pattern or you start getting the cues that you start executing some level of a safety pattern, right? And part of saying when this happens, I'm going to remove the children and or I'm going to call the police and or I'm going to do X. This isn't okay, right? And they still may do it. That may not stop them at all.
mm,
But you have a plan of what you may do. Please notice that you likely already know some cues
mm,
and begin to respond to that. What might you do?
mhm. Yeah, I love that, Elise. Yeah, and you point out the escalation. You don't always know what
Yeah.
the response is going to be. And so, like Elise said, make a safety plan. Because I think what you're asking is, how do I respond in a way that doesn't cause a escalation?
Oh,
And we don't know that, right? We
mhm,
don't know if the other person is going to escalate or not.
mhm,
All you can do is show up in a kind and respectful way,
mhm,
truthful way,
mhm,
and then be prepared if there's escalation to keep yourself and your child safe, like Elise is saying.
mhm,
Whether that's leaving the situation, calling the police, safety is key, right? We can't control the other person. We can't control
mhm,
whether they escalate or de escalate, but we can control our conversation
mhm,
and how we show up in that conversation. And so, some tools to de escalate conversation might be to notice what's happening. I don't know the scenario, but, honey, I notice you're getting kind of angry. I
mhm,
notice your voice is raising.
mhm,
um, we're interested in what you have to say, but could you please take a breath? So you can try to de-escalate it
mhm,
with some kind and loving words,
mhm,
but
mhm,
whether or not that actually does de-escalate is we
mhm,
can't guess, right? So be prepared
mhm,
to make sure that you're safe.
mhm, mhm. Yeah.
So we do talk about in Empowered to Change difficult conversations. We practice difficult conversations, and we do give tools about how to de-escalate conversations.
Mhm,
But throughout, we want to make sure that you're safe,
mhm,
right? So you taking responsibility for you is important,
mhm.
but we can't take responsibility for another person's
Right.
behavior ever.
Ever.
Ever. So you have an opportunity here to help your child, um,
Mhm, mhm,
by applying some really useful
mhm.
school tools,
Right.
right? To really show them what can you do when you get berated by somebody else.
Mhm, mhm. Right, and
To
it's all
honor
around.
yourself, keep
Mhm,
yourself safe. Go
100%.
ahead, Elise.
No, I was just saying this is really all around our topic today about I feel like I'm being a bad example because of marital stress, right? And that was a great question we just really talked about right there. Really saying, we don't know if you're being a bad example or not. We certainly, hope that you're not. We don't want you to be guilty when you are trying your best and no matter what, it's not turning out well doesn't necessarily mean that you're being a bad example. Almost what Susan was saying. We want you to step in with your best tools so that your children can see a positive example, a positive response, whether he is a bad example or not, you can be a good example. And that's really our job, ladies, is to equip our children to be strong adults when they launch,
Mhm.
right? And we're just called to that moment and that, in that day, right? And it's going to build over the years. But one of the things I would love for you to think about is when they launch, what do I want them to look like?
Mhm.
And let's let this crucible that you all are in be a hot, proving ground of like how strong they could be when they leave the home. Now,
Mhm.
I'm not suggesting that you stay in it. I'm just suggesting that while you're in it, if it's
Mhm.
one more time, if it's 10 more times, or I don't know, but while you are in it, can this be an equipping place for you and your children on how to be safe, how to protect yourself, how to respond well,
Mhm.
how to de-escalate, and that way it may not turn out great and we may not feel yummy about it at all. I mean, the truth is we may not like that was really hard. That did not go well. But we can glean from it like my children will know X. Now what they do with it still belongs to them, but maybe we could use it as an equipping ground as well. So
Absolutely.
let's go
Yeah.
to another question. Is that okay?
Yeah, should we go to our ticker? Julie's collected, some questions for
Yeah, let's do
us.
it. Let's do it. Because Susan,
Yeah,
we both have to step off at 1 o'clock sharp.
yeah. So I'll read the first one here.
Okay.
My friend is feeling, hypocritical as a Christian that she is not just forgiving hubby, dad, and moving on. How
Mhm.
much do you tell teen and young adult children about all that's going on that is so wrong that's causing the separation? Okay, that's a good question. How
Mhm.
much do you reveal to your children so
Mhm.
that they understand what's going on?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we
Mhm.
get
Mhm.
this type of question quite a lot.
Mhm.
Um, so I don't think, first of all, the first part of your question, I don't believe that Christ teaches us just forgive and move on, forgive and forget, right? That is something that is used as spiritual abuse. Um, Forgiveness does not equal repaired relationship,
Right.
right? So it is often wise to remember, especially when we're talking about patterns of destructive behavior,
Mhm.
it would not be wise for you to forgive and forget that that's happening because it puts you at a safety risk,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Forgiveness is between you and the Lord, right? So that
Mhm.
you don't get a bitter heart and a hardened heart.
Mhm.
But whether or not you can repair the relationship is dependent on whether that pattern of destruction changes or not, right? So we don't want to just move on, so to speak.
Mhm.
The destructive person would much rather have you just move on so that they aren't challenged to do any of their own work.
Right.
But that's not wisdom for you, right? It's not safe for you to just move on. And as far as how much do you tell your children, I think you, number one, need to be age appropriate,
Mhm.
and you want to make sure that you're not bashing their dad in some way, that you're
Mhm.
not throwing him under the bus.
Mhm.
You want to go with facts,
Mhm.
facts that are age appropriate.
Mhm.
Yeah, do you have more specific thoughts on that, Elise?
Well, I don't. One is that I would love for you all to see what Susan did here. And so when you write out your question, that she really broke it down into this part, and this part, which is really good for all of us and for all of you to say, can I address this? And then how do I address this? And now how do I address the last
Mhm.
part of this about telling my children? And so, because all of it mattered when you got to the part about addressing, the children, when we talk about forgiveness and not forgetting how important that is. Well, one, I don't know if this is a true phrase or not. Years ago, one of my supervisors said to me, she goes, Elise, you can never undo knowing. So I think that that's true. I think that we have, like when somebody says, "Oh, remember when we were in third grade?" and sometimes,
Mhm.
and somehow we, all of a sudden it pops up. We have that recall, right? Don't know how all the storage units work, in our brain and where they all go and everything. But the truth is, we really can't undo knowing, and what we shouldn't undo knowing when harm can continue to happen. But forgiveness is so different from that. Now, as we walk with our children in this place, I think it would be a great disservice to them to for there to be more confusion, like they observe something, but you're saying something different. And the age appropriateness is a really important piece, and how you know your children. Like I may think that the 14-year-old is plenty capable of something, and your 14-year-old isn't even close to that. And so not only just the age appropriateness, but the age appropriateness of your own children. How do they receive that? And then the question a little bit around that, be careful that we don't get in such high protection mode that we don't help them mature through a hard place. Staying with the facts, staying with the truth. And it may be that we, unfortunately, are the messengers of hard things. We can also be the messengers of tenderness and love and compassion, and show them that we can be in hard places and come out on the other side. I know for me as a mom, mine are grown, but it's so easy to, it's like, oh no, that's going to hurt them. Oh no, that's going to, and kind of always putting up that big shield. And not that anybody wants to open the floodgate of hurt, but back to that word of equipping them. How do I equip them? And this is what's happening to them right now. Right. There's my, so, do we want to move to that next question?
Yes.
Helpful.
I feel like it's one thing for me to learn and implement these questions. How do I encourage my husband to do the same? I'm responsible for me.
Mm-hmm.
So true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Have you not encouraged your husband already? So people who want to grow and get healthy can be encouraged to do so. Mm-hmm. People who don't want to grow and be healthy will become resistant. Mm-hmm. So you may already know the answer to this, right? Mm-hmm. You may have already encouraged and invited. It does happen sometimes that women grow stronger and their mate sees that in them and says, wow, you've really made some amazing changes. I want some of that for myself. How did you do that? What are you learning? And sometimes they get angry. Mm-hmm. Right?
True.
I don't like the changes in you. I can't control you as easily. You're holding boundaries and I don't like your boundaries. Mm-hmm. Right? So what are your thoughts, Elise?
Yeah, no, I think I'm just kind of all on the same page with you around that. I'm looking at something you said that bit at the very beginning. That's amazing, but I feel like it's one thing for me to, just influencing him. And I think you really addressed it, Susan, just like, what is he telling you already by his behavior? Right. Mm-hmm. Like if he's interested, he will step into that. And what a curious question might be is, have brought a lot to the table around this. And, it seems like, or by my observation, you're not wanting to pick it up. Are you interested, not interested? Just be curious. Or, I'm curious that I spoke into something and you didn't give me much feedback. What's that about? Right. And so, he may kind of, well, I don't know. I just, who knows? Right. But listen to the feedback, and you don't have to listen with your ears. You listen with your eyes. Susan used the word resistance. If there's resistance, there's the feedback. Mm-hmm. I'm not real interested. What will that mean for you if they are not interested? Mm-hmm. It's kind of my question back to you, because you still have a choice at that point. All right. I'll read that.
Go ahead.
I can't. I don't have I only have the comment side, so I think you need it because it runs out. My teenagers, 16 and 14, don't want to stay. What goes past that?
Don't want to stay with their father half the time. Mm-hmm. His untreated ADHD is the root cause of our separation. The chaos at his house is hard for them. Mm-hmm. as is his difficulty in reading social cues. We don't have a custody agreement yet. I know he loves them, and I encourage them to spend time with him. Should I force them to stay with him when they don't want to?
Mhm. Mhm.
Is the better example listening to what they're saying or forcing the time together in hopes of rebuilding their relationship? That's a real challenging one.
Yeah, ask the question part again. I mean, the just at the very end.
Should I force them to stay with him
Mhm.
when they don't want to?
Mhm. Mhm. I think I wanna almost ask the question back, what I would wanna think that out by saying, if I require that of them, force is a big word. I don't know that but if I require that of them, why am I requiring that? Like, if they have to get complicit to me and I'm actually in charge of that decision, can I want you to take responsibility then for that decision. If I require that of them, why? Why am I requiring that of them? What
Mhm.
was the other question with that? There was a 2.
Um, yeah. Is it the better example just to listen to what they're saying or force time together in hopes of rebuilding the relationship?
Yeah. Um, just quickly, and I want you to answer this as well, is that I would say, well, read it one more time because I had the answer, now I lost it. Sorry. Sorry. What was that? Sorry.
Should I force them to stay with him when
Yes.
they don't want to? Is the better example listening to what they're saying or forcing the time together in hopes of rebuilding their relationship?
Mhm. I don't know that I would hopes in building the relationship. I would love to listen to them, though. I would love to listen to them and help them with their distress. What does that mean for them to have to sit with an ADD ADHD dad, right? What does it mean for them to sit in that chaos, especially around 14, 16? They are, you're kind of on the last, you're starting to get on the last stretch here of them being in your home to influence them a lot. Once they start getting driver's license and stuff, your sphere of influence starts shrinking pretty fast, right? And so if they're going to have a lifetime with a dad, that this is their challenge, I would love to hear what's hard for them
Mhm.
and ask curious questions. Can you kind of coach them around how to manage this challenging relationship? Because avoiding sometimes is a good is a good thing, right? We're not saying all relationships have to happen, but in the likelihood, especially this early on, like let them make those decisions a little further out. Can this be a growth experience for them? What's your
Mhm.
what's your addition there, Susan?
Well, what comes up for me is really this sounds like it's starting to cross into a legal issue. And so I would really, really encourage you to touch base with an attorney, or if you already have an attorney, to see what your responsibility is here. Because my concern for you is that you don't want to look like you're trying to keep your kids from their father.
Mhm,
But also, I hear you. So I love Elisa's response. Absolutely pay attention to what they're saying,
mhm,
ask great questions of them,
mhm,
help them to manage their relationship to their father,
yeah,
because that's going to be lifelong.
mhm, mhm,
But also getting really good legal advice on what do you do here so that you don't look like you're alienating them or you're the bad guy or you're uncooperative. So that would be my concern for you. And so I would really want you
yeah.
to
Can I
seek legal advice. Mhm.
first and foremost, I agree with Susan. Like, that's the first step. Make sure you're not because that can turn south so fast and, you're super well-meaning and the law does not see it that way, right? And you're
Mhm.
trying to protect your children, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, make sure you're in good legal standing, that you really understand parent alienation and that you don't participate in that.
Mhm.
Good.
Yeah.
Great, great, great. Thank you, Susan. All right, what's
Yeah.
next? Any
If we
further
just train ourselves to manage our reactivity, even though it might help in the moment, how does that work to solve the underlying problem if he does not change his behavior? And does this help to enable him to continue? Because now there is a restrained reaction.
Go ahead.
Yep. Well, manage your reactivity means choosing a response. So we're not going to be enabling bad behavior, but you're not going to also be adding to bad behavior. If that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
So you may not be able to resolve the underlying problem. If somebody has destructive behavior, you can't change that behavior.
Mhm.
But in having a mature response, you will keep yourself from
Mhm.
destructive behaviors yourself.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we really press into that, right?
Mhm.
Not enabling somebody else's
Mhm.
bad behavior,
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
but also still you want to speak up, but you want to speak up in a kind and respectful way.
Right. Yeah. Ladies, as we kind of go on, let me we might have room for one more, but I would love to kind of get our plug in because we want you to join us. We really do. We are getting very low. There are some openings, there are some daytime openings. There's some very early evening, like right after work. Openings are a little bit later in the evenings are getting super thin. If you need kind of a 7:30 time, I think there may be just a few openings. If you want something right after work, I think there's a few more openings there, and certainly a few just sprinkled out here and there in the daytime. We have a little something almost every day, whatever day of the week is best for you. But we really, really would love you to join us. And so the coaching is 15 to 1. We have an example, two coaches here. Susan and I both coach and facilitate these classes. And we really, really love to do this work. We would love to facilitate in a way that you really, at the end of 6 months, will experience some real change. Now, the change isn't because of us, but the change is because of you, because you really have taken to heart. It is time to do something different for yourself. My hope is that in 2023, this is what you do, that you really kind of press in and say, hey, it's time for me to focus on me. I've been spending so much of my life trying to be the dutiful wife or be the best mom I can be or be the, and I'm doing it to my own detriment. We can still be a beautiful wife, a wonderful parent, and take care of ourselves. Right.
Mhm.
So my hope is that this is the year that you say, hey, I'm ready to really kind of stop and do my own work. My husband needs to be influenced by all this, but maybe I need to be influenced as well. What will it
Mhm.
look like in my home if I do something different? Because that's actually where my own power lies.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I'm going to stay powerless trying to change my husband, even as much as he would need it. And it would substantially make a difference. Ladies, we're just powerless to change another. And I know most of you know that, but gosh darn if we don't still try. And I get that, here, read this book. Here, what do you think about this, right? And so, and this will really help us to create that pause that says, hey, what do I want to say in this moment? Do I need to say something? You know,
Yeah.
how will I say it? And what will I do in this moment? And that we can be measured in what we do and how we conduct ourselves. So,
Mhm.
Susan, we are really at the hour. I know that you need to step off, and I do as well. And so, ladies, if it's okay, I think that we need to say goodbye at this point so that we stay on track on time. Are you okay with that, or did you want to ask one more?
Yeah, we just have one more
Oh, okay.
actually available. So if you have just a second,
Yeah. Yes.
what are the skills and personal character that I need to build before starting to date and to notice in the other person?
Go for it.
Well, I'm thinking, what are the skills and personal character? This is what our group is all about, right? Becoming a healthy person,
Right.
and healthy seeks healthy,
Right.
right? If you aren't a healthy person, you are not going to be attracting healthy mates.
Right.
And so, there's all the things that we're talking about, how to
Mhm.
choose responses. Who
Mhm.
are you? What are you passionate about? How to manage your own stress?
Mhm,
All of these topics that we are addressed are
mhm,
really the things to work on to become healthy, to make sure that you're a good partner for
mhm,
another healthy person.
mhm, mhm,
We can't, like Elise was saying, we are not going to solve somebody else's problem ever.
mhm,
But change always begins with us,
mhm.
right? So creating change in ourselves, becoming a healthy person is going to matter.
It
It
is.
is going to make an effect on your life, even if the other person doesn't change.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
Mm, absolutely. That's
So
beautiful.
thank you. I appreciate you being here with me today, Elise. And like she stated, we still have openings. Our groups will be filling up. So if you have a particular time need, I would suggest that you go to leslievernick.com/change
Mhm.
and check out the schedule, check out the details of Empowered to Change to see if this is the right group for you.
We sure hope it is. Please join us.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
Take care.
you.